Welcome back, everyone. We're talking right now with Pamela Conte, who's running for a seat on the Haverhill School Committee. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give us a little bit about your history as to your background and what compelled you to make a run for the Haverhill School Committee?
Well, I've lived in Haverhill for about 34 years now, and I have very much become a part of the community. I have worked with the schools, in the schools, and I have worked in many service organizations here in the city, and I very much like to see the city grow and prosper.
And what do you think are the biggest factors that are confronting the Haverhill school system right now that you think you could give some guidance to?
That I could give guidance to, that's harder. I think one of the biggest problems is that it's a constant problem with the city and in the schools, is that there's never enough money to do what you need to do. Mm-hmm. Do I have solutions with coming up with that money? Not necessarily. There are always grants that you can try for, but you never know what you're going to get. I think one of the biggest ways that we can support our schools is through volunteering. If we have more people volunteering their time at the school. I spent a lot of time volunteering at the school when my kids were in school. I was fortunate in that I had a work situation where I could go to the school during the day. But I feel there are other opportunities for volunteering at the school in the evenings as well. And there are many ways to support our school. And I'm hoping that I can bring a little bit of that spirit of volunteerism to the community and to the school system.
You know, I think I can relate to what you're talking about. I know that it's going to be years ago when I was the head of a certain committee at the Chamber of Commerce to have all the CEOs. We had about 14 or 16 of them or so, and we'd go once a month to the Early Childhood Intervention Center to do a read aloud program. And at first, it was one of these things where you get these people that were bank presidents and all this. You want me to do what, Frank? And I said, well, come on, it'll be okay. And they'd come and they did it once, and then they got hooked, and then they said, well, I'm going to buy these other books, and they did. And the kids kind of got into it. And that was a spirit of volunteerism that really paid dividends, because you could see just in the interest level in the kids' eyes that you made a connection. And you were hoping that it made a difference for them as they were growing up and what they would do. And that's the sort of thing, the dynamic that you're talking about too, no?
Exactly. When you have a person in a strong, well-recognized position in the community come in and meet with children, and they see that that person is giving value to that child. It's so important to give value to the children, and that they're taking time out of their very busy days to come in and to mentor these children and to spend time with them and to share with them. I think the children come away with a feeling of, you know, this person thought I was important enough for them to come spend time with me. And maybe I want to be a little bit more like them someday.
Oh, sort of like a mentor without the kids knowing about it necessarily, yes, because they're that young, but just how they're making that connection. Would the volunteering that you're talking about have to do mostly with younger kids, or what are we, we're talking about, and we talk about some of the issues with regard to drug use and drug abuse and dropout rates, things of that type, and performance levels. There are certain points that as the student gets older, is it harder to get to that student if that student is at risk? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, it's definitely harder to get to the student. I think the older they get, the longer they've had a problem, the more they have withdrawn, and the more they pull away when people try to offer help. And offering them help when it's an adult and it's a teenager, it's usually like, yes, you're still that person in an authoritative type position, yeah, and they can't always relate to them. I think having peer support can help them a lot. Sometimes if they have a friend or a mentor their own age that they can go to and count on, it will allow them to open up a little bit more, and then maybe that mentor can help lead them to more guidance with somebody who's more experienced than that young person is.
Okay, I see, and that's because there are all types of different dynamics and things that enter into a student's life and their psyche that educators are not necessarily privy to, but is really impactful to their learning process. when
It
we...
doesn't just happen when they're teenagers. There are things that come into young children's lives that are most unfortunate, that very much impact their ability to learn. There are things that may be happening at home or in their community that are very upsetting to them, and it makes it very hard for them to focus when they come into the classroom.
So how do you get past that? Is it possible to get past that with teachers not being qualified psychologists necessarily or psychiatrists, but there are, well, let me put it to you this way. As I understand it, there are probably 7 or 8 different ways of learning something. But the conventional wisdom for the school system focuses on one track which they think this gets to most of the kids. But there are other ways that kids may be able to learn or digest or absorb the same subject matter, but differently. And I mean that by some people are visual learners. Yes. Some people that I remember watching a program, it was a documentary on TV, and I remember the same subject matter when I was in high school. And I just thought to myself, if I could have only seen this documentary instead of listening to the professor, and he was a nice guy, and he knew his stuff, but there's a difference between knowing the subject matter and being able to effectively convey it to the student, you know? And that's why, in some ways, I probably fall into a category of more of a visual learner for some of the things that I've seen. Or if there's, you know, from a narrative standpoint, when you listen to somebody with what they're talking about, you know, like books on tape or things of that type, for people that may even have problems like dyslexia. Do you see what I mean? Am I on the right track?
My children benefited greatly from having some very wonderful teachers that used multiple ways to teach the children.
Excellent.
I have 2 children who are mildly dyslexic and who, though maybe not on an IEP,
what does that mean?
An individual educational plan or program. They didn't have a special course that they had to follow. They still had teachers that supported them and to help them learn in many different ways, and used a variety of teaching methods with them. So I think they benefited from that, and I think that does exist in our school system because I've seen it. And my children would often have a book that they were required to read.
Right.
We could go to the Haverhill Public Library, and through the Merrimack Valley Library Consortium, if they didn't have it at the Haverhill Public Library, we could request the book on tape from another library. It would come in, and they could read their book and listen to it at the same time. So they had the support of the auditory learning at the same time they were doing the visual learning. And doing it at home, they could stop the tape, put down the book, they could write notes, and then they could start it up again.
So are you saying, and coming up on time now, are you saying that the elements that you're looking to be able to have students partake of are actually there, it's just that they are not in a lot of cases being applied to the right student?
I think that they were applied to my children. I think that was very fortunate. And then once they got into high school, being able to go to the Haverhill Public Library, maybe a lot of parents aren't aware of that opportunity. So maybe making people more aware of things that really do exist here, things that aren't going to cost us extra money.
Resources.
We have
Good
these resources here. You can do this. If you have a book that the child needs to read for school, you don't have to go out and buy it. You can get it through the library. Even if the library doesn't have it, we have the whole valley available to us.
Very good. Pam Conte, running for a seat on the Haverhill School Committee, and it shouldn't be lost on anybody if that name sounds familiar to you. You are the daughter-in-law of the former city councilor and much beloved Betsy Conte, are you not?
Sir. Yes,
sir. You're very modest not to have said that, but I said it for you, so that's okay. We wish you the best of luck in the upcoming election, Pamela.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It.
Okay.